Welcome to the Innovators Club for Women webinar channel, where innovation meets inspiration. I am the CEO and founder, Katie Cupstis.
So you start to focus and you start to build culture wherever you want to build it, right? And to me, that reputation was everything. Without a reputation, you don't have much of a company, especially what we were doing. And that was one way to kind of underscore, that fact.
100%.
And I would do
Yeah.
that again. I would do it again
Yeah.
if and when I ever start another company, we'll do the
Yeah,
same.
that's so great. Yeah, and feedback is everything. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to this next slide here. All right, so what's something you wish you knew before becoming a CEO?
Yeah, just one. So, I think looking back, I thought incorrectly that being successful at it, that's something meant that you had to dream up some crazy new invention, and it had to be super complicated and like, wow, this is so hard, but I can do it. And I think ultimately what I realized, because all these failures and these little things that I was trying never panned out. And really what ended up working was something that was incredibly simplistic. We basically built a website platform on WordPress. That's what it was, right? But we did it in such a way where we could scale it. I was like, holy smokes, like if I knew that a long time ago, I would have done it 12 years prior, right? But you don't know that until you try it. So I like especially now, even more so, I like the idea of simplicity, keeping things simple. Don't overcomplicate things if you don't have to. There's a beauty in taking something complex or potentially complicated and simplifying it and distilling it into just some core little pieces, especially if you're a new company, especially if you're trying to articulate to somebody else, whether you're going for investment or looking for clients or customers or whatever, like, you need to simplify things. So I think that would be like one of those. I'm sure there's a ton more, but I think that's like one of those lessons that for me, I was kind of stubborn and I was like, no, that's too easy. Like I want to do this other cool thing in some other industry. I didn't want to do insurance. My dad was in insurance industry. Like, but what I've learned is that it's a great industry. I became incredibly passionate about it. I didn't start that way. And it wasn't as hard, quote unquote, as it maybe I thought it had to be.
Right. I think that's so key. And that's something that I talk to all of our innovators about as far as keeping it as simple as possible. Yeah, it's brilliant advice. So, what advice would you give to founders who want to sell their companies?
So a couple of things. And some of it's business and some of it's personal. So on the business side, there are a couple of things that would be really helpful to think about if that's the goal. If eventually, maybe it's not tomorrow, it might be years from now. If you're like, I'd love to exit, or I'd love to take funding, or I'd like to de-risk or take some chips off the table, as people say, whatever those things are. The value of a company is going to be higher if you have a great solid foundation. It's a well-run company with the processes and the workflows and all the stuff I talked about before. But when it comes to revenue, not all revenue is the same. So if you can find a way to build up recurring revenue, fantastic. That's a really great way to do it because it's predictable. And that's what we had. So we charge $250 a month for each client. It's $3,000 a year. And that times a bunch of clients is better than a couple of clients paying a big price tag because there's more risk with that. If you have 5 clients paying you $500,000, that's very different than if you have thousands paying you a couple $100 a month. So all of those things kind of weigh into creating a company that is more valuable. If it is a subscription like that, like a SaaS, software as a service model, like we're talking about here today, churn is a big one. So retention is important. You don't want to bring on 30 clients a day or whatever and then lose 50 a day. Like, what's the point of that? You're going backwards. So your churn has to be low, which means your retention, keeping the clients happy, has to be high. In our case, that was super important because we didn't charge setup fees. We didn't have long-term contracts or anything. So we didn't really make money on a client until a year and a half later after they signed up. And that was a risk we took, but it was a bet that paid off. So I would say those are a couple of things on the business side. On the personal side, I think having some semblance of what you want to do after the transaction is important. Now, that might, if you're selling and then you're working for the new company and you have a position and you're going to grow it bigger and then maybe sell it again, and well, that's your thing. That's something, right? In my case, I kind of, like I mentioned before, my motivations were different, and I was like, basically, here's the company. I'll help you transition whatever I need to, but otherwise, it's all yours. And I think looking back on it, it would have been helpful. And I know that, talking to other folks that have been through this process now, like I have been for the last couple of years, having an idea of what you want to do next, even if it's a vague idea, is always helpful. Because what ends up happening is you have this thing that you're constantly thinking about. It's constantly on your mind. It's nights and weekends, and you can't shake it. There's always a problem to be chewing on. And there's something that you're excited about, and you're creating this and you're building this, and your brain is constantly going. And for better or for worse, you have an identity that gets wrapped up into it. You have a purpose that gets attached to this business thing. And then if it just kind of disappears and you get a bucket of cash or whatever you get, it's just a strange thing that you have to go through, So I think having something lined up is super helpful. I was talking to an entrepreneur. He sold his company for hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was in therapy, still is in therapy for 5 years. And he's like, Jeff, I'm still not feeling like 100% myself after the sale of this company. So it's very true that money doesn't buy happiness. And trying to figure out how to navigate that transition is really important, right?
Yeah. And that,
So
well,
that's some
that takes us
personal
to the
advice.
next question. So yeah, I appreciate that. Because I think that is something that no one really considers, until, you've built this thing for so long, especially in your case, for how many years, and then, you know, and then it's just gone.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
it can be a difficult adjustment, I am sure. Um, oh, are we at the end here? I think we might be at the end.
I think there was a
Um,
slide at the beginning that you might have skipped over. I'm not sure.
Let me go back and see. Oh yeah. Let me see.
There you go. I don't think we
Yeah,
talked
there we
about
go.
this.
Yeah. So, yeah, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced? I would say not just, you know, grow while you were growing the business, obviously after, but what you're dealing with now. But how did you handle them during that time, especially since it was such a long time span between beginning and the end?
Yeah. Well,
Having
again, for
kids,
me,
all those things during that
yeah,
time. I
well,
mean,
it's a
that was,
balancing act. It's definitely a
yeah,
balancing act,
right.
100%. Yeah, I don't think there's a work-life balance. Like, I don't think there is such thing as a work-life balance. I think it's just life. I think it all mixes together in certain ways. Um, so when you mentioned the kids, it's funny. Ella, our daughter, she's 12. She's written me some incredibly insightful little notes and snippets over the years. Like, you'll see a couple of, if you go to the What's Next
Mhm.
Jeff, you'll see it on there, and on social and stuff. I post some of them. But so last night she did the same thing. She sat there on her Chromebook from school, and she's like, "I'm writing something for you, Dad." I'm like, "All right, like, what is this?" I have no idea what she's gonna say. And it basically said, "Why you should get a job." Right? It's like, you haven't been doing anything. You basically retired at 46, and the average age of people who retire is actually 65. So that alone says everything. And she keeps going, she's going on and on and on. And here's what you should do. You should do this with your teeth. I'm like, oh, you're 12, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you said the
Yeah.
kids, what I recognized is that I'm actually really glad, and I'm proud of the fact that there's I think there's a tendency maybe for some people to put business like off to the side and say, that's work stuff. It's boring. You don't want to talk about it. And way before COVID happened, we made the decision to go remote. And we're going to, because I wanted to be home. I just wanted to be home. I wanted to see the kids,
Yeah.
even though we had a full-time nanny and stuff. I just wanted to be there.
Right.
And I'm so glad that I did that, because what you don't recognize is that they see that, whether they're kids, like I'm talking about here, but just people see the passion that you have. And if you're excited about it, like genuinely excited about it, people sense that. But if you keep saying, "Ugh, work, I have to get up for work again," like, well, then they're going to sense that. So what's been fascinating through the last couple of years, especially with Ella, to a lesser extent, Connor, Ella kind of had this, like, she's pushing me to go back and like have another company like as soon as possible. And like there's almost like a piece of her identity that was excited by what we were doing and seeing that. So having family and personal stuff in business and trying to grow at the same time and make money is a hard it's a hard thing. I remember driving down the road in the car in Center Valley, Pennsylvania, and saying, how am I going to pay for the gas getting down the road here? Like I was constantly thinking about finances and making ends meet and that sort of thing. So those are all big challenges. And, once we got to that position where things scaled, where got this platform and then it was like, and then things took off, obviously the challenges are just different, right? So now it's like scalability issues and stuff that worked, before we had $1 million in ARR, annual
Yeah.
recurring revenue, it doesn't work anymore. Like it was so easy then, but now everything fell apart. What is happening? Like, so you have these kind of plateaus that you have to, navigate, and they're usually unexpected. Um, there was a time where we had a sales team of 4 people in Columbus, Ohio. We had an office there. And within the course of a month, we had 4 go to 0. And so one guy left, went to another startup, well-funded startup company. And then a week later, he took our number 2 guy with him.
Oh
And
my
then
gosh.
our number 3 person had some health issues, so she couldn't work anymore. And then our number 4 guy said, well, I don't really want to be here if no one else is here, and I don't want to do what I'm doing anyway. So I said, well, that's not going to work for you then. So that's a really stressful period. And by the way, one of the notes that Ella wrote me was about that. And that's posted. You can actually go read that on the what'snextjeff.com site somewhere. So that's tough, but if you have a team around you, and thank God I did.
Yeah.
I remember spending hours on the phone with Monica Barakat, who was my COO, and we're like, what the hell do we do? Like, we have all these demo requests coming in. We don't know how are we gonna do demos? But ultimately it forces you to think differently and think creatively, and it kind of pushes you out of your success complacency, as I call it. And some of the best things happened from that, right? So it's like you're at this in the valley, but
Yeah.
when you come out,
Yeah.
you're usually a better, stronger person and company for it. So there's
Great.
all those challenges. There's personal stuff that goes in it. There's business challenges that come with it. It's all hard. If it was easy, everybody would do this. It's
Yeah.
one of the hardest, statistically, it's one of the hardest things to do. Um, but for some of us, it's like that's inspiration too, right? The chip on the shoulder. Well, I'll show you. Of course I can do this.
Yeah.
Might take 18
Totally.
years, but I'll figure something out. Yeah.
Well, and that being said, how did you balance, as new ideas came up in the company with managing the daily operations and obviously all the bumps in the road that come along with it, like the things you just mentioned?
So we were really simple, almost maybe too much, which maybe was a fault. We had one product. It's called Active Agency. It was $250 a month. There was no like good, better, best model. Like if you go into the Apple store now, there's like 12 iPhones you can buy with all kinds of different price points, which is kind of like a smart way to do it. We never did that. We never got to that position where we had to, or we just never did it. Maybe we should have. So it was pretty simple from like a outside looking in standpoint. Now inside it was more complex, and having a system and a business that can scale and handle support requests and all this stuff can be tricky. So there's like the operational thing where you have to make sure that the business just runs like the machine. It's like I think of it like a machine. Like if you're building the machine, you need to be in there with your sleeves rolled up like my pap, like my dad's dad was down in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, like on a shop stool, like winding armature electric motors for like, elevator shafts and stuff. He came home in greasy and overalls, and like I kind of look at it that way conceptually. This is very different. This is like, white collar kind of, hard work.
Yeah.
But you need to get in there. Like if you're going to own a hotel, you got to make some beds. I love that saying. So you got to get in there. So initially it's like you're doing it, but you're doing it to build a machine that can run when you're not doing it. So that was, that's hard. It's just hard to build something that doesn't exist to make it so that it does, and then make it so that it runs well enough that you can scale it, and then have other people come in that actually can run the machine. But what that does is it gets to what your question is, which is then the thing runs, right? And then you can say, okay, we can look at this other thing over here. So a couple of things that we looked into is, do we offer a different pricing plan, like active agency light? So instead of 250 a month, it was 175 or something. So we contemplated this and we looked at reports and features and how would we slice and dice it. So we looked into that. We also looked into creating an entirely new product. I mentioned this at the beginning. We ultimately never got there. And the company that acquired Forge 3 has that platform, has that product, which is why it's a complementary, acquisition.
That's awesome.
So I think if you have the machine, and if the business is running in a way that can operate without you for the most part, you become less important, which is great.
And that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
And I
Yep.
think everything you just said are all the things that I really try to talk to our innovators about, just keeping it as simple as possible, because no matter what you do, it's always going to be hard, all the things you just said. But if you're trying to focus on two, three, four different things, most likely one of them is not going to work, let alone all four
Yep.
things.
Yep.
So yeah, so thank you for that clarification, because I think that's really great advice. And give me a couple of common mistakes that not just necessarily SaaS startups, but any startups could make when they're trying to grow.
So I'm seeing more. What's been interesting the last couple of years is I've been mentoring an increasing number of companies. I'm on the board of a company. So you just get roped into these just really interesting concepts. Like yesterday, for example, I was downtown Charleston in an escape room with some neighbor who's been tinkering away on these physical boxes. Like it's basically like a geocaching thing with an escape room, and you take your cell phone or your phone, your iPhone, whatever, around. You find these boxes that are hidden out there, and you unlock them, and a thing happens. It's like nuts. So this guy's like right down the street doing this in his house. He stopped his marketing agency to focus on this stuff. So I was like, well, how did I get here? This is just crazy that you're in these conversations now. So now they're
Yeah,
talking about putting it downtown Charleston, these boxes all over the place out on the streets, which is really
cool.
interesting. But seeing just the breadth of companies has been really fascinating. And then what's starting to hit me is kind of what your question is, which is like there are certain things that I see over and over again, regardless of the idea, the company, the vision, like whatever. And I think the biggest thing is that there's such a beauty in simplification. I remember, so a couple weeks ago, I went out downtown. I was invited to a dinner with a guy that's looking for money in the healthcare space. And it was me and a bunch of other people around the table. And I sat there for 2 hours, listened to him. I don't think I'm the stupidest guy on the planet, but I had no idea what it was. And I'm like, there's got to be a simpler way to explain it or to do it. Or, if somebody can't articulate it and explain it in the right way, are they going to run it in the right way? Or
Right.
is the machine just going to have parts flying out of it and there's gears flying over here and it's too chaotic. So I think there's a real need, at least for me, to just simplify, understand what it is, think about it, get rid of whatever the nonsense is around it, and just hone in on what the thing is. And you have to. I don't know. I'm not smart enough to know another way to do it. Because if there's too many things that you're focusing on, like you were saying, Katie, I don't know how you do all those things. Sure, if
Yeah.
you're a bigger company and you have a bunch of resources at that stage, you can. But even at that point, you have people that are focused on like a thing, right? Like you're not just
Hmm.
saying, oh, willy-nilly, what am I going to do today? Oh, let's try this and let's try that. So
That's it.
there's experimentation that's needed, of course. And there's trial and error, and there's this awkward, like trying to crawl before you walk and walk before you run, and then you fall over again and that didn't work. And then you kind of go through this process. So it's not, you don't want to simplify and say, this is how it is forever. Like you got to try things, but keeping it elegant, keeping it simple, I think is one of the biggest mistakes that at least the companies that I talk to are are running into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Simplify it, you know?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, this has been so great. And I know,
So you start to focus and you start to build culture wherever you want to build it, right? And to me, that reputation.
for more information and to watch our webinars in full, visit our website, innovatorsclubforwomen.org, and join as a member to build your startup for full success.